These allergies are killing me. Ugh. Ugh. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I'll be doing my reading wrap-up for the month of April. As per usual, we will start with my stats. I read a total of 8 books, which is not the best, but not the worst. Definitely a very middling number for me as far as books in the month. 3 of those were ebooks, 3 were audiobooks, and 2 were hardbacks. I read a total of 1,728 pages with my eyeballs and listened to a total of 36 hours of audiobooks, and my average page length of a book was 345 pages. My average rating was a 3.5, and you can see my breakdown at the bottom here. Again, a very kind of middling month for me. Definitely not the best, but I did have a 5-star in there and some high books, which we will talk about. As far as where I got these books, I didn't read any of my owned TBR books I bought more than a year ago. I borrowed 3 books from the library. I had 3 books from the publisher. I borrowed 1 book from my mom, and I bought 1 book this year. And my genre breakdown, 2 of them were historical fiction, 2 were fantasy, 2 were nonfiction, and 2 were mystery thrillers. So before we jump into the book by book review, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing to my channel if you like bookish things. So we will start with the first book I finished in the month, and that was Maid of Steel by Kate Baker. This was an arc from NetGalley and was a part of a NetGalley reading vlog that I did, so I will link that here and down below so you can check that out if you want more in-depth thoughts. Overall, this book was good, but not very good. I ended up giving it a 2.5 star. It was an historical romance set in the 1910s. A young woman gets in an accident in the factory she works in, and then her family sends her over to Ireland to recuperate, and a romance ensues from there. I enjoyed the story well enough. I just didn't think that the author included enough fluff. Like, there wasn't enough character development, there wasn't enough world building or setting description. There just wasn't. It was very plot heavy. Like, you go from point A to point B, and you don't really get the journey in between the plot beats. So I enjoyed it. It was fine. I had a good time reading it. I got through it very quickly, but just not really something I think I could recommend as something you should go out and go buy and go read. The next book I finished was also a part of that NetGalley reading vlog. The next book I read in April was also a part of that vlog, and it was the Daughters of Izdihar. I really did enjoy this. I gave it 3.75 stars out of 5. I knocked off some stars just due to the pacing. It was pretty slow in the beginning, you know, whereas Maid of Steel had all plot, no fluff. The beginning of Daughters of Izdihar is lots of fluff. Like, our 2 main characters that we are following don't even meet each other till like halfway through the book, and that's when things start getting really good and juicy. But this book follows, like I said, 2 main characters. They are both magic users in this Egyptian culture-based society, and magic users are mostly looked down upon within this culture. But what I think this book does really well is kind of do a philosophical discussion through our 2 different characters on the politics of revolution. They are both involved in this women's suffrage / just kind of women's rights movement, and one of our main characters comes from high society, lots of money. The other one does not come from high society and grew up very poor. So kind of exploring how a revolution works through their 2 different perspectives, and how their class and gender affects their ability to operate within the society and the potential for revolution. So I think this book interwove that so seamlessly in a way I really enjoyed. and I'm definitely excited to be picking up the next one. This series is only a duology, which is nice. On another note, I did listen to this as an audiobook, and they do use 2 different narrators for each woman's perspective, which I also really enjoyed. Reading fantasy as an audiobook can oftentimes be really difficult for me to follow, but having those 2 different narrators helped a lot. The next book I read in April was the last book of that vlog, and that is Mastering the Art of French Murder. I really enjoyed this one. It is a super fun, like, mystery thriller about the neighbor of Julia Child, the real-world author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking. So it was really fun to follow, you know, the fictional neighbor of a real historical figure. Julia Child is someone I really find fascinating. I listened to her biography / kind of memoir thing a couple years ago, and just she led a fascinating life. So it's really fun to get to explore her character a little bit more in a more fictional sense. I also really appreciated about this book specifically that the author really took a lot of time to research and figure out what 1950s Paris would have felt like culturally, being, you know, post World War II, post occupation by the Nazis, and their relationship with the police, obviously being a murder mystery. The police are going to be involved, and these French people are going to have to be interacting with them. So I really enjoyed it. This one also seems like it's going to be a series, but just kind of a fun, more Agatha Christie kind of popcorn series. If you do enjoy those kind of Agatha Christie, whatever, I think this is definitely one to check out. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. Gave it 4.5 out of 5. So definitely recommend. The next book I read was a buddy read with some of my friends, and that is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I did not like this book. This book was not for me. It is again a murder mystery story following this group of people who live at a retirement home, and it's kind of their hobby to solve cold cases, and they get involved in a active case and so it's just following them as they help the detectives work through this case. It's very British. It's got a lot of British cultural references that I didn't always get. It very much has like the British humor style that isn't always very clear on paper. It also had just like so much going on and so many different storylines tied into this one kind of murder case. And there was actually like 2 different murders going on, and we had so many characters to follow, and there was a lot going on. And then kind of my last kind of dig at this book is I really don't like being in the perspective of an antagonist or like a bad guy. I mentioned this in my review of Wait last month, but I don't like being in the mind of bad people, and like especially like bad men who think bad things. Like I don't need to be in your mind to know that you're a bad guy. The one perspective specifically in this book, I cannot remember his name even. Before we even jump into his perspective, I knew he was shitty. Like it was very apparent from other characters' perspectives that he was shitty. So we really didn't need to be in his perspective to further investigate his shittiness. The next book I listened to was The Windsors at War. This was also a NetGalley arc and will be a part of a NetGalley vlog sometime in the future, so I won't go over it too heavily here. But what really got me interested in this book is the weird dichotomy of the British royal family at the time. Queen Elizabeth II's dad was never supposed to be king. He was the second-born son, and his older brother Edward VIII was king in, I think, 1933 time frame, and actually abdicated the throne so he could marry an American divorcee in 1936. And if you know anything about World War II history, taking over as the king of the UK in 1936 is not an ideal time. I was intrigued by what this book could be, the family dynamic between 2 brothers, Edward VIII and George VI. George VI being very obviously anti-fascist, being very anti-Nazi, and from what I had known before this book, Edward VIII being pro-Nazi, hanging out with a lot of Nazis, being friendly with the Nazis was kind of something I was really intrigued and eager to explore further. What I actually got out of this book was just kind of a play-by-play of everything going on in World War II involving the UK, and that's just not really what I wanted. I didn't really want World War II history. I wanted a family drama of being on opposite sides of a global conflict and being such influential people. I wanted basically like a reality TV show peek into their lives. And instead I got 13 hours of World War II history that I have heard done better in a lot of other places. So I was definitely disappointed in this. I ended up giving it 2 stars. There was some of that back and forth I was looking for as far as the relationship between the 2 brothers. The author does use a lot of first-hand accounts, written correspondence, letters, interviews, that kind of stuff. So we do get some of that interpersonal relationship, but we get too much of the other just boring, dry history stuff that I was not as interested in. The next book I read was actually my 5-star of the month, and that is The Shadow of Perseus. This was my pick for the Shelf This Book Club hosted by Is Bailey Reading. I was the co-host for the month of April, and this is the book I made everybody else read, and I was pleasantly surprised and also a little confused. I know Greek mythology is not for everybody. Like, I recognize that, like, as a Greek mythology lover, that not everybody is obsessed with it as I am. So I was expecting that some people were just not going to be as interested in just the basics of what this book is. But it seems like the people who weren't familiar with the source material seem to enjoy it more than the people who were, except for me. So I don't know. Kind of interesting, but this is a book about Perseus and Medusa from the perspective of the women in Perseus's life. His mother, Danae, his wife, starts out as not his wife, becomes his wife, Andromeda, and Medusa herself. And I really, really enjoyed it. It takes the historical fiction approach to a Greek mythology retelling where the gods and the magic and all of that stuff is not involved. So it was really interesting for me to see how the author extrapolated this kind of very grounded, realistic story out of the very fantastical myth that we know from Greek mythology as a whole. So I loved it. 5 stars. I think this is probably going to be one of my top favorite books of all time. I freaking love Claire Haywood. I cannot wait for her to write more, hoping. And yeah, that's where I'm at. I loved this book. The next book I read was The Becoming by Nora Roberts. This is the second book in the Dragonheart Legacy trilogy. Last month I read the first book and was kind of like meh on it. It just felt like a very generic portal fantasy to me where someone from our world gets transported into a different world. But this book I actually enjoyed quite a bit more. I really felt like Nora Roberts really utilized all the characters from the first book really, really well, and I just really liked it. Like, I had a complaint last time that the gay best friend felt very stereotypical and kind of one-dimensional to me, and in this book he really gets fleshed out as his own full character, which is really nice to see. I think the main character, Breen, really comes into her own. We ramp up the romance, we ramp up the conflict. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm actually currently had just started the 3rd just because this left me wanting more, and I'm loving every second. And then to finish off the month, I listened to Unmasking Autism, and this is a book I would recommend for anybody who has ever thought, wow, that whatever experience of going through day-to-day life was really difficult for me in a way I think it probably shouldn't have been. Maybe I have a little bit of the neurospicy. So if you have ever thought that or anything akin to that, I would say you need to read this book. This book is just so powerful in the way the author describes autism, in the way the author incorporates different people's experiences with autism. The author himself is a trans man and is openly autistic. And just the author's ability to delve into the intersectionality of autism as a disability with race, class, gender, sexuality, just all of it was just it's just impactful. This is a very impactful book. If you have any sort of like inkling that you may be on the spectrum, or if there's someone in your life that you think may be on the spectrum or is diagnosed on the spectrum, I would just really, really recommend it. I don't know what else to say. I chose not to rate this just because like what this book is, you know, being so revolved around, you know, people's experiences, and it's also a little bit of a self-help book, I guess. As the title states, Unmasking Autism, it is kind of a guide of certain exercises that if you are on the spectrum, you can use to kind of help unmask yourself, to stop masking your autism or your ADHD or whatever other learning disability or developmental disability you may have. And it changed the way I thought about a lot of things. And I think I'm just gonna leave it there. And this is the end of the video. So what a way to end the video on a book that is just so... I'm gonna be thinking about this for a long, 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 long time. So with that, those are all the books I read in April. I had a very hit or miss month. Let me know how your April went. And thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.